wearing a pair of on oculi shades, we'll call them shades.
If you like.
I'm here this afternoon with Onka Davis, gifted guitarist, musician, composer, theorist about music and how it can and should be taught. A lot of ideas and a lot of wisdom. And we want to remind people that this interview is kind of in preparation for the panel after the war, after war panel that's happening in Midtown Manhattan on Saturday, June 18th at 8 p.m. And of course, we'll have the link underneath. So if you want to get a ticket, you can definitely do that. Brother On, how are you doing today? Onka Davis, how are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you. Yes, doing okay. You know, we're maneuvering through all of this in especially the last 3 years going on now, right?
Well, I think you've been maneuvering very well. We had a nice opportunity to play before an audience in Cottage City, Maryland, which is right outside of DC. And it was yourself, Brother Don McKenzie on drums.
That's right.
And Luke Stewart on bass.
Yes.
And I was playing electronics, and that came out very well.
Yourself. Yes, yes. In fact, I'm kind of sitting on it. I do want to release it as a release, and you reminded me of something else. I have to bring out the fire and bring that out, because I actually was well satisfied with that performance. I thought it was really really outstanding, and I really enjoyed the time to have done it as well. And thanks, Bushmeat, for the opportunity. Yeah, man.
Now, before I started the camera, you put on your shades, and I said, wow, that reminds me of a pair that I saw Sun Ra wearing back, really a long time ago. And you said, well, of course, those were my designs.
Yeah, it was probably around 93, I think, when I presented him with a design. In the 90s, beginning in the year 1990, I first crafted a design eyewear for really just for myself, or just kind of a funky look to have. And I wore them about at happened to have been a Black Fashion Expo, and a designer friend of mine, Ademola Mandela, who during the 90s was well known for his Knapp's hair salons. I think he ended up having 3 of them across the city at one time. And he had also branched out into fashion. So we had already been acquainted. He saw me there and he says, wow, those are kind of interesting. Would you like to contribute to a fashion show? And I hadn't really thought about it before. So being artistic minded all the time, I thought there was something I could get involved with. So I made 3 pair, and I was able to have them presented at the show, and they were actually the last thing that were featured in the fashion show. And when the models came out with the eyewear, the whole room went boom. And from there, it had its own momentum. And I became established as an accessory designer for eyewear that went mainstream as a wearable art eyewear designer. And I did all type of high-end editorials for magazines. Eventually was in Vogue magazine.
Very, very striking on you, man. Very, very striking. It's just, it's a cool look. Now, let me say that the respect for the urge to create is a part of what makes a person an artist at a very deep level. And I think you share that with Sun Ra. How did you meet Sun Ra?
I had a long track getting to Sun Ra. I was made aware of him, I guess, mostly in my student days. I was around 19, 20 years old. And believe it or not, my world is so much a part of, like, I guess, being in the jazz community, so to speak. But at that time, I was kind of a novice to the whole thing. So I was very much interested in what Sun Ra was doing by reading about him, listening to his music. And it happened when I came to New York. Radu Ben Judah who was one of my long-term music friends, who one of the first persons I met when I first came to New York, we were working together in an off-Broadway show. And at the time the show opened, of course, they had the programs that were printed and they had the bio resumes of who's who in the show and so on. And I read that Radu had been working with Sun Ra. And so I told Radu I really wanted to meet Sun Ra. And he took me around Sun Ra and I met him for the first time. And actually, I tell you the truth, the very first time I saw the band was in Central Park. And they did the walk around through the audience thing that they used to do. And the band walked right in front of me. And I'm thinking to myself, man, this is like the blue, blackest, darkest band I've ever heard, I've ever seen, you know. And so different stages happened where I was around Sun Ra because of Radu had introduced me. And interestingly enough, when I first met Sun Ra, he asked me some questions like, first question he asked, and I hope this doesn't sound so, you know, racially slanted, but the first question he asked me, he says, well, how much white have you got in you? You know, and I thought that was a very interesting kind of question. I didn't quite understand what this is. So I went into this whole thing about, well, I have a lot of Native American in my family, and my dad's from, evidently he's like Louisiana. And then my mother's maiden name is Kennedy, so I guess there's some Irish up in there. And I went into this whole thing, and so I didn't really care about it. I think what he was really interested in was like what kind of orientation I had aesthetically and artistically and culturally. That's where he was at, because couldn't anyone say anything about the appearance, say, of Marshall Allen or Danny Thompson or anybody else in the band. So, you know, I didn't realize that. And there was many things that Sun Ra said that I didn't really get into really years later. But to make a long story short, eventually he gave me his phone number. He told me to call him. And I went to Philly and I became a part of the family. And I want to say this because in a lot of ways, I kind of went in the front door and kind of out the back door with the band because of my personal situations of sorts. And for me to harp on my involvement with Sun Ra, you know, they're guys, the members in the band that, you know, will probably think a little differently about my tenure being there in terms of its longevity and my impact in the band and so on and so forth. However, I can say with a good confidence that I earned a good friendship and respect with John Gilmore, to this day with Marshall Allen. And then, of course, as time has gone on, a lot of the members of the band are no longer on the planet. But I think what happened with me is that I was able to have a very heavy experience being there, and of course, any being with someone like that and having that experience is very profound would be for anyone, you know, to come into that. And at that time, I was being single parent with my son, so what I was able to do was mostly focus on things more locally, shows in Philadelphia, shows around New York, things like that. And at that time I was in the band, interestingly enough, the band wasn't touring, but the band was constantly being on the stage at what was called, interesting enough, the Squat Theater on 23rd Street, and did a series of Fridays and Saturday night shows consistently for months at the Squat Theater. And I made all of those. There is a book that's out called the Definitive Collection of Sun Ra Recordings. And it talks about the recordings that were made at the Squat Theater. And I have to say it that when it mentions the members on the bandstand, it says guitar player unknown. So that was me. And I did write back to let the guy know that I have to remember the author's name. I have to look it up. I'm sorry, I can't recall it, but in the moment.
Okay.
But so, you know, I've been pinned but not pinned, you know.
The unknown guitarist.
Well, a little bit like that, you know.
Yeah.
So,
but you know what, man? That's in keeping with the whole mystery school alignment of the whole thing. You know,
well,
like, yeah, I was there.
I suppose so, but you know, and during that time, Sun Ra recorded all the time, so I'm up in all those kind of tapes. There are some releases that he made on his independent label. I don't know whatever happened to them. You know, I don't know what exactly namesakes they are. I think the Dance of Innocent Passion was something I thought that I was a part of, but then listening back to it, I'm not sure that if I was on that or not, to tell you the truth. But one thing that did happen was that out of the Sun Ra band, there are certain artists, especially like Khusenaton Shu Amon, and you know, we started probably the only subset group that Sun Ra, you know, wanted to recognize. I know years later, Ahmed Abdullah started his band. Yes. But the first one was Khusenaton's band, and he's not on the planet any longer. But you know, he truly loved Khusenaton, and one very profound thing I want to mention about the relationship with Khusenaton and the band. After Sun Ra had his first stroke, and there was a massive benefit all weekend long that was going on at the village gate, and it was like who was there either in the audience or played on the bandstand or something. And the finale night was a Sunday, and I was a part of that with the band, and the band got together and the band played a free set of like about an hour long. And it was Sabir, Mateen, and Khusenaton and myself stood in front of the band. And Khusenaton started doing the backhand thing that Marshall does on the keys, with his backhand going up and down the keys. Khusenaton started doing that. Marshall Allen stood up on the bandstand, waved his horn in the air, and acted as though he was presenting his horn to Khusenaton, you know, in the most profound moment I'd ever seen. You know, very deep. And that's how the kind of respect that Khusenaton had and the love that the band had for him. Later on,
I didn't know Sabir Mateen was in that. Sabir Mateen is somebody that I presented here in DC before.
Yes. Well, he and Khusenaton were, you know, they were birds of a feather for like a lot of years. And so then later on, Sun Ra had a second stroke. And the most profound thing, I couldn't imagine anyone witnessing any such a thing any more profound than at the concert debut of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and him standing there totally deaf, never heard a note. And Sun Ra was in the wheelchair, and he conducted the band with his eyes. And it was the most profound thing you'd ever want to see. I'm talking about sitting there in the wheelchair the whole concert. He was conducting the band with his eyes. After the concert, this was at the Bottom Line in New York, a club that's not there anymore. After the concert, I went back to see Sun Ra, and the backstage had two dressing rooms, and the band was in one side, and Sun Ra was on the other side, and June Tyson was on the other side with Sun Ra. And she was back there folding up the costumes and the uniforms and putting things away. And I went back to see Sun Ra, and I had a few words with him. He didn't answer back. And then he extended his hand to me. And I took his hand, and June saw that, and June walked out the room. And I was with Sun Ra just holding his hand for, I don't know how long, it seemed like 5 minutes, and he didn't say a word, neither did I. And it was the most profound experience I had with anybody and with this man. And I don't know who else kind of experience he gave to anybody else the same kind of way. And when I think of that personally, and when I think of how some of the members of the band might think of how my involvement might not have been profound or a very, very long involvement with the band. And if I'm, going out talking about how I had all these experiences being, or Sun Ra this and Sun Ra that, and they say, hey, well, he was just sort of there, sort of not, and so and so and so. I think that, this personally was something very different. I dare say to this day that except for Ahmed kind of like recanting Sun Ra tunes and what Khusenaton had done, which was a lot more creative in the Sun Ra vein, that I kind of stand alone as expatriate of the band with my interest and my desire to personalize my artistry in the spirit of what Sun Ra had conveyed to me. And in the metaphysical sense, I truly believe that he transferred something to me. I think a certain responsibility is mine to deal with it.
What's the name? I want to cut you off because I need to interject. I got to interject. What's the name of the club where this happened?
This was at the Bottom Line.
All right. I had a very similar experience happen at the Bottom Line. And I write about it in the book. I felt that Sun Ra told me to write this book years ago. Years before I had an idea about writing anything. Sun Ra gave me his cane. And in that moment, I understood that I had some work to do for Sun Ra.
Right.
And it messed me up, man.
Right.
You know, it was such a peculiar internal feeling.
Right.
You know,
yes.
Okay. Okay. So we're here. And I'm glad to be talking to you. I'm glad to be playing with you. What does music do for people?
Well, music can exist for a lot of different purposes, I would imagine, to say so. I mean, in the higher sense, yes, it has a responsibility of being transformative. It has a responsibility for being healing. It has a responsibility for opening your chakras and inviting to intuition and inviting enlightenment at the highest level. And on other levels, you know, it's simply help to pass the time or something that you can, you know, agitate your body against in terms of dance is concerned. It's something to entice sexual prowess, to be quite frank, you know, and which is what we basically find with, you know, popular music, which is, you know, obviously more profound now than ever before. You know, we've come a long way from Elvis twisting his hips. That's for sure.
Maybe.
You know, in terms of popular cultural music is concerned, we've come a long way. But, you know, ultimately, you know, I think the musicians can take a position of wanting to be, as has been described, as you've also described me as being a type of a tone scientist or whatever, whereby, you know, it becomes that. You know, and what does that mean? Well, there's metaphysic and academic endeavors involved with that. Like, what does this note do? Or can we actually build sonic structures? Or can we heal the body? Or can we create metaphysical planes wherein, you know, people can reside on and actually have some place of a refuge away from the mundane, you know, world that we're aware of at this present time. It can be complex. I think it's the responsibility that the musician would take upon themselves. Someone like a Sun Ra, since we're using him as a frame of reference, you know, he was all that. You know, he included a sense of fun. He included a sense of nostalgia. He included a sense of tradition and culture. He included a sense of the metaphysical. He dealt with music by design that he knew that would create molecular structures. He did music by design that he knew that musicians would not comprehend for years to come. He used to talk about, well, he was writing for, you know, on the high school level, but most musicians can't get on his college level. And he used to joke about that. And I was trying to figure things like that. You know, people talk about John Coltrane's Giant Steps and how challenging that is. And that's like one of the ultimate jazz pieces to try to play. Well, you know what? Those are Sun Ra changes. It's not John Coltrane. Sun Ra introduced the idea of the relationship of the major third identities and major seven identities. You know, and at the time that was novel. That was novel because the jazz developed along the lines of the seven chords and the minor and the major chords and the seven chords. And I always knew that Charlie Parker had a much simpler formula for what he was doing. And basically, if you really kind of analyze it, you know, he's basically controlling just a simple major chord. I mean, a major scale rather, you know? So, I mean, that's my analogy, you know, and then people might say, well, who am I to say? You're not Whit Marcellus, you're not this, you're not that, nobody knows your name, you're not teaching school, you're not a professor, blah, blah, blah. What do you know about it? Well, I don't know, I do my own study like any other musician, and you try to practice, you try to figure things out.
With no disrespect, Baba, music is a lot like sex. You can't get very far talking about it. And we are inviting everyone that hears this video who is able to come to 222 East 46th Street in New York, New York. It's called Blue Gallery, 8 p.m., Saturday, June 18th. The program, as presented by the People of Color Psychedelic Collective, is called After War: Opportunities and Lingering Oppressions. I want to thank my guests before the free Zoom time limit runs out. I'm watching it tick away up here.
Okay.
And again, encourage all of you to come out. It's not even 2 weeks now. So if you're in New York or can be in New York, you don't want to miss this. On Davis, Bushmeat Stanley, Thomas Bushmeat Stanley, Jamal Gray, and DeHondo Smith. We're going to be one cosmic blackadelic quartet playing some incredible music for the rivers there and the rivers here.
And I want to just add in, you know, my tag always playing extra good for all y'all. You know, that's a promise.
Right on. Thank you, people. See you there.
Peace.
Thank you, Barbara.
Peace.